The autumn wind swept through Willow Creek with a mournful whisper, carrying with it the scent of dying leaves and forgotten dreams. Caleb Morgan stood before his grandmother's weathered cottage, his calloused hands gripping the rusted key that would unlock not just a door, but a destiny he never could have imagined. His 6-year-old daughter, Lily, pressed against his side, her small frame fragile as a bird's wing beneath her oversized coat. The autoimmune disorder that ravaged her tiny body had left her pale and breathless, but her eyes, those bright amber eyes that mirrored his late wife Sarah's, still sparkled with curiosity. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Daddy, why does Great-Grandma's house look so sad? Lily whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. Caleb's throat tightened. Everything looked sad these days. The unpaid medical bills stacked on his kitchen table, the resignation letter he'd been forced to submit after missing too many days caring for Lily, the empty spaces in their apartment where Sarah's laughter used to live. "It's just been lonely, sweetheart," he managed, turning the key with trembling fingers. "Houses need people to make 'em happy again." The door creaked open, releasing the ghost-scented air of lavender and old memories. Sunlight filtered through dusty windows, illuminating a world frozen in time. Dried herbs hung from wooden beams like ancient prayers, their colors faded, but their essence still clinging to the shadows. Delilah Morgan had been the town's unofficial healer for decades, her small apothecary a sanctuary for those whom modern medicine had failed. Caleb's chest ached as he stepped inside. He could almost hear his grandmother's gentle voice echoing through the rooms, feel her weathered hands guiding his own as she taught him to identify plants during his childhood visits. "Remember, Caleb," she would say, her eyes twinkling with secret knowledge. "The earth provides everything we need. We just have to listen." But he hadn't listened. He'd chosen science textbooks over herb gardens, choosing the sterile certainty of chemistry over the mysterious whispers of ancient wisdom. And where had it gotten him? Unemployed, drowning in debt, watching his daughter grow sicker each day while doctors shook their heads and spoke in careful, hopeless tones. Lily wandered toward a dusty bookshelf, her small fingers trailing along the spines of countless volumes. "Look, Daddy, books!" She pulled out a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. "This one's really old." Caleb took the book from her delicate hands, his breath catching as he recognized his grandmother's elegant script on the cover. Delilah's healing recipes, for those who remember the old ways. He opened it carefully, expecting to find simple folk remedies and kitchen wisdom. Instead, his eyes widened as he scanned page after page of detailed botanical illustrations, precise measurements, and complex preparation methods. This wasn't just a cookbook, this was pharmaceutical compendium disguised as grandmother's folklore. "Daddy, there's something stuck in here." Lily pointed to a loose sheet of paper wedged between the pages. With careful fingers, Caleb extracted the page, his breath caught in his throat. Unlike the neat recipes surrounding it, this page was covered in frantic scribbles, chemical formulas, and molecular diagrams that would have looked at home in a graduate biochemistry textbook. At the top, in his grandmother's shaking handwriting, were the words, "For the children who suffer. When the old medicine meets the new science, miracles are born." Below that, a formula so complex it made his head spin. But scattered throughout were notes in plain English. Willow bark extract, 2.3% salicylic acid concentration. Echinacea purpurea root, enhanced T-cell activity. Local moonwort, key compound unknown but shows remarkable immune regulation. Caleb's hands began to shake. As a biology teacher, he recognized enough of the terminology to understand this wasn't just herbal tea recipes. This was serious pharmaceutical research, decades ahead of its time. "Daddy, are you okay?" Lily's voice seemed to come from far away. He looked down at his daughter, her pale face upturned with concern, and suddenly the room began to spin. This morning they'd gotten another letter from the hospital about overdue payments. This afternoon, Lily had collapsed during their walk, her small body racked with another immune flare that left her gasping for breath. The doctors had run out of options. The experimental treatments were beyond his financial reach. He'd been preparing himself for the unthinkable, watching his daughter fade away the same way Sarah had, helpless and heartbroken. But now, holding this impossible page in his trembling hands, a dangerous spark of hope flickered in his chest. "Just thinking, baby girl," he whispered, carefully folding the paper and slipping it into his jacket pocket. "Just thinking about what great-grandma wanted us to find." As they packed the rest of Delilah's belongings, Caleb's mind raced. That formula, those precise measurements and chemical notations, they meant something. Someone, somewhere, would know what to do with them. And maybe, just maybe, that someone could save his daughter's life. The setting sun painted the cottage in shades of gold and amber as they prepared to leave. Lily had fallen asleep in the car, exhausted from the day's adventures. Caleb stood in the doorway for one last moment, his hand pressed against his jacket pocket where the mysterious formula lay hidden. "Thank you, Grandma," he whispered into the gathering darkness. "I promise I'll listen this time." He didn't know then that those scribbled notes would lead him into a world of corporate greed, scientific breakthroughs, and billion-dollar betrayals. He couldn't have imagined that his grandmother's simple herbs would become the center of a legal battle that would make headlines across the nation. All he knew was that for the first time since Sarah's death, he felt something other than despair. He felt hope. And hope, as dangerous as it was, might just be enough to change everything. The morning air in Atlanta carried the sharp bite of ambition and exhaust fumes, a stark contrast to the gentle whispers of Willow Creek. Caleb gripped the steering wheel of his aging Honda as he navigated the maze of glass towers and concrete arteries, Lily's soft breathing the only sound breaking through his mounting anxiety. 3 weeks had passed since they discovered the formula. 3 weeks of sleepless nights spent researching every chemical compound and botanical term he could decipher. 3 weeks of watching Lily grow paler, weaker, while doctors spoke in hushed tones about managing expectations and comfort care. The breakthrough had come at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday when his desperate Google search for echinacea immune regulation pharmaceutical research had led him to a small biotech startup called Genesis Labs. Their website was modest, almost humble compared to the corporate giants that dominated the industry. But buried in their research publications, he'd found a name that made his heart race. Dr. Vivian Reyes, lead biochemist specializing in natural compound pharmaceutical applications. Now, standing in the stared lobby of Genesis Labs with Lily's small hand clutched in his own, Caleb felt like a fool. What was he doing here? What made him think a legitimate scientist would take seriously the ramblings of a desperate father and his dead grandmother's recipe book? "Mr. Morgan?" The voice was crisp, professional, with the faintest trace of a Cuban accent. Caleb turned to see a woman approaching them, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, white lab coat pristine over charcoal slacks. Dr. Vivian Reyes was younger than he'd expected, maybe 35, with intelligent brown eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. "Dr. Reyes," Caleb stammered, suddenly aware of his worn jeans and daled stubble. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. I know this is unconventional." Vivian's gaze dropped to Lily, who was peering up at her with undisguised fascination. Something in the scientist's expression softened. "You mentioned your daughter on the phone? Is this the young lady?" Lily stepped forward with the fearless curiosity that illness hadn't managed to steal from her. "Are you a real scientist? Do you make medicines?" A ghost of a smile played at Vivian's lips. "I am, and I do. Though most of the time they don't work the way I hope they will. Mine don't work either. That's why Daddy thinks maybe great-grandma's recipes might help. Vivian's eyes sharpened, focusing on Caleb with renewed interest. Yes, about that. You were rather cryptic on the phone. Something about herbal formulas and chemical compounds. Caleb's throat felt like sandpaper. I know how it sounds. Believe me, if I had any other options. He pulled out the carefully preserved page, his hands trembling slightly. My grandmother passed away recently. She had this shop, treated people with herbs and natural remedies. Most of the family thought it was just folk medicine, but this... He handed her the page, watching her expression change as her trained eyes scanned the complex notations. Vivian's professional mask slipped entirely. She moved toward better light, her lips moving silently as she traced the molecular diagrams with one finger. This is... Where did you say you got this? My grandmother's recipe book. Look, I'm just a high school biology teacher. Was a high school biology teacher. But I know enough to recognize that this isn't just herbal tea recipes. The chemical formulas, the concentration percentages, someone spent serious time working this out. Vivian looked up from the page, her eyes wide with something between skepticism and excitement. Mr. Morgan, this formula, if it's accurate, it represents a completely novel approach to immune system modulation. The compound interactions alone would take years of research to develop. Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs. So it's real? It could actually work?
I didn't say that. Vivian's scientific caution reasserted itself, but Caleb could see the curiosity burning behind her eyes. What I'm saying is that whoever wrote this understood advanced biochemistry at a level that shouldn't have been possible outside a major research facility. She looked down at Lily again, who had found a chair and was quietly coloring in a book Caleb had brought to keep her occupied. Your daughter's condition. You mentioned autoimmune complications? Juvenile dermatomyositis. The treatments aren't working anymore. We've tried everything. His voice cracked on the last word. Vivian was quiet for a long moment, studying the formula with the intensity of a woman who dedicated her life to unlocking the secrets hidden in molecular structures. Finally, she looked up. I'll be honest with you, Mr. Morgan. 99% of the time when people bring me folk remedies and family recipes, they're worthless, wishful thinking dressed up as science. I held up the page. But this 1%, this has markers that suggest genuine pharmaceutical potential. What does that mean? It means I'm going to test it. The decision seemed to surprise even her. I can't promise anything. Most likely we'll discover it's an interesting historical curiosity and nothing more. But the compound interactions your grandmother mapped out, they're theoretically sound for immune regulation. Caleb felt tears prick his eyes. How long would something like that take? Initial analysis? A few days for basic compound identification and interaction modeling. If the preliminary results are promising, she shrugged. Weeks, maybe months for proper testing. Lily looked up from her coloring book. Are you going to make medicine from great-grandma's recipes? Vivian knelt down to Lily's level, her professional demeanor giving way to genuine warmth. I'm going to try, sweetheart. Your great-grandmother seems to have been a very smart lady. She was. Daddy says she knew things that other people forgot. As Vivian stood, Caleb caught something in her expression, a flicker of personal investment that went beyond scientific curiosity. Dr. Reyes, is there a reason you're willing to do this? I mean, you don't know us, and I'm sure you have other projects. Vivian was quiet for a moment, her eyes distant. My grandmother was a curandera in Cuba, a healer. When I was growing up, the other kids would make fun of her remedies, call them backward superstition. I spent my whole career trying to prove that modern science was superior to folk medicine. She looked at the formula in her hands. But maybe sometimes the old ways and the new ways aren't so different. Maybe they're just waiting for someone to build a bridge between them. 3 days later, Caleb's phone rang while he was giving Lily her morning medications. Vivian's voice was tight with barely contained excitement. "Mr. Morgan, I need you to come in. Today. Right now, if possible." "What is it? What did you find?" "I found," Vivian said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, "something that could change everything. Your grandmother wasn't just a healer, Mr. Morgan. She was a genius." Caleb's hands shook as he ended the call. Beside him, Lily looked up with those amber eyes that held too much wisdom for a 6-year-old. "Is it good news, Daddy?" Caleb kissed the top of her head, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. "I think so, baby girl. I think great-grandma is still taking care of us." But as he helped Lily into her jacket, Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing at the edge of something vast and dangerous. Hope was a powerful thing, but so were the forces that would soon be interested in what they'd found. And in the gleaming towers of Atlanta, powerful men were already beginning to take notice. The 37th floor of the Meditex Pharma building gleamed with the cold perfection of absolute power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of Atlanta's skyline, while the conference room's polished marble table reflected the faces of men and women who had built fortunes on human desperation. Preston Carrington stood at the head of that table like a general surveying his battlefield. At 42, he possessed the kind of ruthless charisma that had elevated him from Harvard dropout to biotech mogul in less than 2 decades. His tailored suit cost more than most people's cars. His smile was practiced perfection, and his gray eyes held all the warmth of surgical steel. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the smooth authority that convinced investors to trust him with billions, "we have a problem." He clicked a remote, and the wall-mounted screen displayed Genesis Labs' quarterly reports. The numbers were grim. A small startup hemorrhaging money, sustained only by passion and stubborn hope. "Our little competitors at Genesis have been circling the drain for months. I've been patient, waiting for them to collapse, so we can acquire their assets for pennies on the dollar." His expression darkened. But yesterday, something changed. Another click brought up a series of molecular diagrams and compound analyses. Dr. Vivian Reyes has been running tests on something new, something that shouldn't exist. Margaret Shaw, his head of acquisitions, leaned forward. "What kind of something?" Preston's smile was the smile of a shark scenting blood. "A novel immunomodulating compound with applications that could revolutionize autoimmune treatment. Patent potential? Conservative estimate, $500 million. The room stirred with interest. These people understood the language of profit margins and market domination. "Where did it come from?" asked Dr. Richard Stern, Meditex's chief science officer. "That's the beautiful part," Preston purred. "Some desperate father with a sick kid and his grandmother's recipe book. Can you imagine? The poor bastard probably doesn't even understand what he's sitting on." 2 miles away, Caleb sat in Genesis Labs' small conference room, his world tilting on its axis as Vivian spread the test results across the table like tarot cards predicting an impossible future. "The preliminary analysis is extraordinary," she was saying, her voice tight with scientific excitement and personal wonder. "The compound interactions create a cascade effect that essentially teaches the immune system to recognize the difference between foreign threats and healthy tissue." Lily, coloring quietly in the corner, looked up with interest. "Does that mean it would help my body stop being confused?" Vivian's expression softened as she looked at the little girl. "That's exactly what it means, sweetheart. Your body's soldiers are fighting the wrong battle. This medicine could show them who the real enemies are. Caleb's hand shook as he studied the charts and graphs that might as well have been written in hieroglyphics. So it could really work for Lily, for other kids like her. The theoretical framework is sound. But Caleb, you have to understand, taking this from laboratory analysis to actual treatment is a journey that costs millions of dollars and takes years of clinical trials. The weight of reality settled on his shoulders like lead blankets. How many millions? Before Vivian could answer, the conference room door opened. A man in an expensive suit entered with the confident stride of someone who owned whatever room he walked into. Caleb didn't recognize him, but he could see Vivian's posture stiffen with unmistakable tension. "Dr. Reyes," he said, his smile warm as summer sunshine and twice as dangerous. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion. When I heard about your interesting new project, I simply had to meet the gentleman responsible." He turned to Caleb, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "Preston Carrington, CEO of Meditex Pharma. And you must be Mr. Morgan." Caleb shook the offered hand, immediately unsettled by the man's practiced charm. "Mr. Carrington, I'm not sure what you've heard, but we're still in very early stages of research." "Oh, I'm sure Dr. Reyes is being appropriately cautious. But from what I understand, your grandmother's formula shows remarkable promise. Remarkable enough that I'd like to discuss a partnership that could benefit everyone involved." Vivian stepped forward, her voice carefully neutral. "Mr. Carrington, I wasn't aware you were interested in our research." Preston's laugh was warm and inviting. "Vivian, you know I keep my finger on the pulse of breakthrough discoveries. And this could help so many people. Children like your beautiful daughter, Mr. Morgan." He knelt to Lily's level, his practiced smile never wavering. "Hello there, sweetheart. I'm Preston. I run a company that makes medicine to help people feel better." "Are you going to help Daddy make great-grandma's recipe into real medicine?" "I certainly hope so," he said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "Your great-grandmother must have been a very special lady to create something so wonderful." As he stood, Preston's attention returned to Caleb. "Mr. Morgan, I'm prepared to offer you something that Genesis Labs simply cannot. The resources to turn your grandmother's wisdom into real help for real people. Clinical trials, FDA approval, global distribution. The full might of a Fortune 500 pharmaceutical company behind your family's legacy."
Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Caleb felt the walls of the small conference room closing in. What exactly are you proposing? A licensing deal, generous compensation for your cooperation, full credit for the discovery, and most importantly, The fastest possible path to getting this treatment to children who need it. The silence stretched taut as violin strings. Vivian's knuckles were white where she gripped the edge of the table. Lily had stopped coloring, sensing the adult tension that filled the air like electricity before a storm. "I appreciate the offer," Caleb said slowly, "but I think I need some time to consider all my options." For just a moment, Preston's mask slipped, revealing something cold and predatory beneath the polished surface. Then the smile returned, bright as ever. Of course. Take all the time you need." He pulled out a business card, pressing it into Caleb's hand. "But remember, Mr. Morgan, opportunities like this don't wait forever. And sick children certainly don't." After he left, the conference room felt like a tomb. Vivian sank into her chair, her face pale. "What just happened?" Caleb asked. Vivian looked at him with eyes that had seen too much corporate maneuvering, too many good intentions crushed under the weight of profit margins. "What happened is that we just painted a target on our backs. Preston Carrington doesn't make social visits, Caleb. He doesn't offer partnerships. He identifies valuable assets and then he takes them." "But the formula is mine, my grandmother's. He can't just take it." The look Vivian gave him was full of bitter knowledge. "Preston Carrington has lawyers who could convince a jury that he invented gravity. If he wants your formula, he'll find a way to get it." That night, Caleb sat by Lily's bedside as she slept. The peaceful rise and fall of her chest, the only thing anchoring him to sanity. In his pocket, Preston's business card felt like a loaded gun. In his kitchen table, medical bills continued to pile up like accusations. In his bank account, the numbers grew smaller each day. And in laboratories across the city, brilliant minds worked to turn his grandmother's wisdom into weapons of corporate warfare. He thought about Preston's words, "Opportunities like this don't wait forever." He thought about Lily's pale face and the way she'd smiled when Vivian explained how the medicine might help her body stop fighting itself. Most of all, he thought about Delilah's gentle voice echoing across the years. "Remember, Caleb, the earth provides everything we need. We just have to listen." But as the night wore on and his daughter's breathing grew more labored, Caleb began to wonder if sometimes listening wasn't enough. Sometimes, perhaps, you had to fight. The old cemetery in Willow Creek held secrets in its weathered stones and overgrown pathways, but none more profound than the one Caleb discovered 3 days after Preston Carrington's visit. He knelt beside Delilah's fresh grave, Lily's small hand warm in his own, as morning mist clung to the ancient oaks like whispered prayers. "Tell me about the missing piece, Grandma," he murmured to the headstone, his voice barely audible above the wind. The answer had come to him in the sleepless hours before dawn, as he had pored over Delilah's notebook for the 100th time. Buried in the margins of a seemingly innocent chamomile tea recipe, he'd found a notation that made his blood run cold. "Moonwort essential. Without it, the symphony becomes mere noise. Location known only to the keeper of old promises." Moonwort, a plant so rare that most botanists consider it mythical, a ghost from medieval herbalism texts, but Delilah had written about it as if she knew exactly where to find it. "Daddy, why are we here so early?" Lily asked, her breath creating small puffs in the cool morning air. Despite her illness, she'd insisted on coming along, sensing that this journey was important in ways she couldn't yet understand. "Because sometimes the best secrets are hidden in plain sight, baby girl," Caleb said, helping her to feet. "And I think Great-Grandma left us a treasure map." They drove through the winding streets of Willow Creek to the town hall, a modest brick building that had stood sentinel over the community for nearly a century. Mayor Jeanette Clay was already at her desk, her silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed morning reports. "Caleb Morgan," she said, looking up with a smile that held both warmth and sadness. "I was wondering when you'd come to see me. Heard you've been stirring up quite a fuss in Atlanta."
News travels fast in small towns. Caleb settled into the wooden chair across from a desk, Lily climbing onto his lap with the easy familiarity of a child who'd spend countless hours in this office during school board meetings. "Jeanette, I need to ask you about something. About Grandma Delilah's old shop." The mayor's expression grew thoughtful. "The apothecary? Haven't thought about that place in years. Your grandmother closed it down when the new pharmacy opened on Main Street. Must have been, 15 years ago now?"
Do you remember what happened to her garden? The plants she grew for her remedies? Jeanette's eyes sharpened with sudden interest. Now that's a story I haven't told in a long time. She leaned back in her chair, her gaze distant with memory. Your grandmother didn't just have a garden, Caleb. She had a sanctuary, hidden away on the old Whitmore property where the creek bends through the woods. Hidden why? Because some of the plants she grew weren't just rare, they were supposedly extinct. Delilah claimed they were heritage varieties, passed down through generations of healers. The state agricultural inspector tried to shut her down once, said she was cultivating endangered species without permits. Caleb's heart began to race. What happened? Your grandmother was cleverer than they gave her credit for. She moved her special plants to a private location, somewhere only she knew about. Said she was protecting them for future generations who would understand their value. Lily looked up at Caleb with those amber eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. Is that where great-grandma hid the moonwort? Jeanette's eyebrow shot up. Moonwort? Now there is a name I haven't heard in decades. Most folks would say that's just a legend. But not Grandma Delilah. The mayor smiled, an expression full of old secrets and older wisdom. Your grandmother never met a legend she couldn't make real. Come on, I'll show you where her sanctuary used to be. The drive took them through the heart of Willow Creek's countryside, past rolling hills dotted with farmhouses and barns that had weathered decades of Georgia storms. Eventually, Jeanette directed them down a dirt road that seemed to disappear into the forest itself. There, she said, pointing to an overgrown path barely visible through the undergrowth. That trail leads to the old Whitmore homestead, abandoned for 30 years, but Delilah had an arrangement with the family. They let her use the back acreage for her healing garden. The path was treacherous, roots and fallen branches creating obstacles that made Lily's progress slow and careful. But as they pushed deeper into the woods, Caleb began to sense something almost mystical about this place. A stillness that seemed to hold its breath, waiting. They found it in a natural clearing where an underground spring fed a small pond. The remnants of carefully planned herb beds were still visible beneath years of wild growth, like the bones of an ancient civilization. But it was the single plant growing beside the water's edge that made Caleb's breath catch in his throat. Moonwort. Delicate, silvery green, its distinctive crescent-shaped leaves catching the filtered sunlight like tiny moons. A plant that wasn't supposed to exist anymore, thriving in this secret place his grandmother had protected. "My God," he whispered. Jeanette knelt beside the plant, her expression reverent. Delilah told me once that this was the heart of everything, the ingredient that made all her other remedies work. She said it was like a conductor for an orchestra. Without it, you just had individual musicians making noise. Lily crouched down beside the moonwort, careful not to touch, but clearly fascinated. It's beautiful, like it's made of starlight. Can I take some? Caleb asked, feeling like he was asking permission to steal fire from the gods. Your grandmother left specific instructions, Jeanette said, pulling a folded paper from her jacket pocket. Said if anyone ever came looking for the moonwort, they should find this letter first. With trembling hands, Caleb unfolded the paper. Delilah's familiar handwriting seemed to glow in the dappled forest light. My dear Caleb, if you're reading this, then the healing has begun. The moonwort has waited patiently for the right moment, the right hands, the right heart. Take only what you need, and remember, medicine born of love heals more than bodies. It heals souls.
The earth provides, but intention determines the harvest. Use this gift wisely, my boy. The world needs healers more than it needs heroes. Love, your Grandma Delilah. Tears blurred Caleb's vision as he carefully harvested a small cutting of the precious plant. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle, the missing element that would complete his grandmother's masterpiece. As they made their way back through the forest, Lily walking between Caleb and Jeanette with the moonwort cutting protected in a small jar, Caleb felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders. He had the complete formula now, every ingredient, every measurement, every secret his grandmother had spent decades perfecting. But with that knowledge came a terrible responsibility. In his pocket, Preston Carrington's business card seemed to burn like a brand. In Atlanta, Vivian was probably running new tests, unaware that the breakthrough they needed was now literally in Caleb's hands.
And somewhere in the gleaming towers of corporate power, predators were sharpening their claws, preparing to tear apart everything Delilah had built to protect. "Daddy," Lily said as they reached the car, "Great-grandma's letter said you need to be wise with the gift. What does that mean?" Caleb looked down at his daughter, her pale face bright with curiosity and hope, then at the moonwort cutting that could change everything. In the distance, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, dark and threatening. "It means, baby girl, that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with swords or lawyers. Sometimes they're fought with love and the courage to do what's right, even when it's hard." But as they drove back toward town, Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest battles were still ahead of them. The email arrived at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday that would later be remembered as the day innocence died. Caleb was preparing Lily's morning medications when his phone chimed with a message from the United States Patent and Trademark Office. His blood turned to ice as he read the subject line, "Patent Application Status Update, Application Number 17892-456. He hadn't filed any patent applications? With fingers that trembled like autumn leaves, he opened the email. The words swam before his eyes like accusations written in legal ink. "Congratulations on the successful filing of your provisional patent for novel immune-modulating herbal compound and methods of treatment. Applicant, Meditex Pharma Corporation. Inventor, Dr. Richard Stern, Chief Science Officer." The phone slipped from his nerveless fingers, clattering to the kitchen floor like his shattered dreams. "Daddy?" Lily looked up from her cereal bowl, her amber eyes wide with concern. "You look sick." Caleb couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The room tilted and spun as the full weight of betrayal crashed down on him like a falling building. Preston Carrington hadn't been interested in partnership. He'd been planning theft from the moment he'd walked into that conference room with his practiced smile and his empty promises. They'd stolen his grandmother's formula, stolen Lily's future, stolen everything. The drive to Genesis Labs passed in a blur of rage and desperation. Lily sat quietly in her booster seat, sensing the storm building in her father's chest, but not understanding its source. When they burst through the laboratory doors, Vivian looked up from her microscope with a start. "Caleb? What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," he said, his voice hollow as an empty grave. "I've seen a thief." He thrust his phone toward her, the patent notification still glowing on the screen like evidence of a murder. Vivian's face went pale as she read, her scientific composure cracking like ice in spring. "No," she whispered. "They can't do this. The formula is yours, your grandmother's work, your heritage." "Apparently, that doesn't matter," Caleb said into a chair as if his strings had been cut. "They have the resources, the lawyers, the connections. What do I have? A dead grandmother's notebook and a sick daughter." Vivian's hands clenched into fists, her dark eyes blazing with a fury that transformed her from quiet scientist to avenging angel. "They must have used the preliminary data from our tests, Preston came here, saw enough to understand the potential, and had his people reverse engineer the basic compound structure. Can they do that? Legally? The bitter laugh that escaped Vivian's lips held no humor. Legal and right aren't always the same thing, Caleb. Corporate law is written by corporations for corporations. They'll claim independent discovery, prior art, insufficient documentation on your part. She turned to her computer, her fingers flying over the keyboard with desperate precision. But maybe we can fight this. If I can document the timeline, prove that our research predated their filing. With what? Caleb's voice cracked like a whip. You said yourself that most of your work was preliminary. They have a full patent application with detailed molecular analysis, manufacturing processes, clinical protocols. How long would that have taken them to develop? Vivian's typing slowed, then stopped. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Weeks? Maybe a month, working around the clock with a full team. They've been planning this since the day Preston walked into this building. Lily, who had been coloring quietly in the corner, looked up with the devastating clarity that only children possess. Does this mean the bad man stole great-grandma's medicine? The simple question hit Caleb like a physical blow. He knelt beside his daughter, taking her small hands in his own. I'm afraid so, sweetheart. But that's not fair. It belongs to us, to the people who need it.
No, baby girl. It doesn't belong to us anymore. That afternoon, Caleb sat in his empty apartment staring at legal documents he couldn't afford to fight and medical bills he couldn't afford to pay. Lily was napping, exhausted by another immune flare that left her fevering and weak. The moonwort cutting sat on his windowsill, a cruel reminder of possibilities that had been snatched away by corporate greed. He was contemplating surrender when his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Morgan, this is Avery Wells. I'm an investigative journalist, and I think we need to talk. The voice was crisp, professional, with an undercurrent of controlled anger that matched his own mood. I don't want to talk to any reporters, even ones who might be able to help you get your formula back. Caleb's grip tightened on the phone. What are you talking about? I'm talking about Preston Carrington's pattern of intellectual property theft. I'm talking about a pharmaceutical industry that preys on desperate inventors and grieving families. I'm talking about a story that needs to be told. How did you even hear about this? There was a pause. Then, let's just say that not everyone at Genesis Labs thinks what happened to you was right. Someone reached out. Someone who thinks the public deserves to know how Meditex builds its fortune. Vivian. It had to be. Despite the risk to her career, her reputation, she'd found a way to fight back. Mr. Morgan, I've been investigating Preston Carrington for 3 years. He's stolen patents from 17 different inventors, crushed dozens of small biotechnology companies, and built his empire on the backs of people just like you. But this case, this is different. How? Because this time, he's not just stealing money or market share, he's stealing hope from a dying child. And that's a story that even his lawyers can't spin. That evening, as Lily slept fitfully in her bed, Caleb made a decision that would change everything. He called Avery Wells back. If we do this, if we go public with this story, what happens to my daughter, to the people at Genesis Labs who tried to help us? Avery's voice was steady, professional, but underneath lay a core of steel that reminded Caleb of his grandmother. I can't promise it will be easy. Carrington will throw everything he has at discrediting us. But sometimes, Mr. Morgan, the only way to fight monsters is to drag them into the light. Caleb looked at Lily's peaceful face, thought about Delilah's letter about medicine born of love, about Vivian's courage in reaching out despite the risks. What do you need from me? Everything, Avery said. Your grandmother's notebooks, the patent documents, the timeline of discovery, Vivian's test results. But most importantly, I need you to be willing to tell your story, all of it. The grief, the desperation, the hope, the betrayal. And if we lose? If Preston destroys us? Avery was quiet for a moment. Then, at least we'll have fought. At least we'll have tried to hold them accountable for what they've taken. As Caleb ended the call, he felt something stirring in his chest that he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. Not hope. He'd learned that hope was dangerous, fragile, easily crushed, but something harder, more durable. Anger. Clean, pure, righteous anger at the injustice of a world where the powerful could steal from the powerless with impunity. Preston Carrington thought he'd won, thought he could take Delilah's legacy and Lily's future and transform them into profit margins and stock prices. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Because sometimes when you push a man too far, when you threaten the things he loves most in the world, you don't create a victim. You create a warrior. The story broke at dawn on a Thursday morning that would forever divide Caleb's life into before and after. Avery Wells had titled it The Healer's Legacy, How Big Pharma Stole Hope from a Dying Child. And within hours of publication, the internet exploded like a supernova of moral outrage. Caleb sat at his kitchen table, watching his phone light up with notifications as the article spread across social media platforms like wildfire. Lily was still asleep, unaware that her story, their story, was being shared by millions of strangers who understood that some injustices cut too deep to ignore.
The article was masterful in its simplicity. Avery had woven together the threads of Delilah's legacy, Lily's illness, and Meditex's corporate theft into a narrative that read like modern folklore, a tale of David facing Goliath, of ancient wisdom confronting corporate greed, of a father's love against the machinery of profit. By noon, #Justice for Lily was trending on Twitter. Mr. Morgan? His phone rang for the 100th time that morning. This time it was a producer from Good Morning America. We'd love to have you and your daughter on the show tomorrow. The American people need to hear your story directly. Before he could answer, another call came in. CNN, then Fox News, then local stations from across the country. Everyone wanted to interview the single dad who'd taken on Big Pharma with nothing but his grandmother's recipe book and a father's desperation. But it was the knock on his door at 2 p.m. that changed everything. Mr. Morgan. The man on his doorstep wore an expensive suit and carried himself with the predatory confidence of a corporate predator. James Whitfield, representing Meditex Pharma Corporation. We need to discuss this situation before it gets out of hand. Behind him stood two other men, equally well-dressed and equally threatening in their polished civility. I don't think we have anything to discuss, Caleb said, his hand tightening on the door frame. Whitfield's smile was razor-thin. Oh, I think we do. You see, your little publicity stunt has caused significant damage to my client's reputation and stock value. We're prepared to file defamation charges unless you immediately retract these false and damaging statements. False? Caleb's voice rose despite his efforts to stay calm. Which part is false? The part where you stole my family's formula? The part where you filed a patent without permission? Or the part where you're trying to profit from my daughter's suffering? The part where you claim ownership of intellectual property that was developed independently by Meditech research team, Whitfield replied smoothly. We have documentation proving that Dr. Stern's work predates your alleged discovery by several months. Caleb felt the familiar rage rising in his chest, but before he could respond, another voice cut through the tension. That's interesting, Mr. Whitfield. I'd love to see that documentation. Avery Wells stood at the bottom of the porch steps, her recorder already running, her eyes bright with the hunger of an investigative journalist who'd just been handed fresh meat. Whitfield's composure cracked slightly.
This is a private conversation, Miss Wells. On a public sidewalk? I don't think so. Avery moved closer, her recorder extended. Would you care to comment on the timeline discrepancies we've uncovered? The fact that Meditech's patent application contains specific molecular structures that only appear in Dr. Reyes's preliminary research notes? No comment. Whitfield turned back to Caleb, his mask slipping to reveal the cold calculation beneath. Mr. Morgan, I strongly advise you to consider the consequences of your actions. Legal battles are expensive, time-consuming, and emotionally devastating. Is that really what you want for your sick daughter? The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Caleb felt his resolve wavering, the weight of Lily's medical needs pressing down on him like a physical force. Maybe Whitfield was right. Maybe he should take whatever settlement they offered and disappear back into anonymity. Then Lily appeared in the doorway behind him, pale and fragile in her princess pajamas, her amber eyes wide with curiosity about the commotion. Daddy, who are these men? The sight of her, his beautiful, brave, dying daughter, reignited the fire in Caleb's chest. He knelt beside her, his voice gentle despite the fury coursing through his veins. These are the men who took great-grandma's medicine, sweetheart, the ones who think they can steal what doesn't belong to them. Lily studied Whitfield with the unnerving directness of childhood innocence. Why would you steal medicine from sick people? Whitfield's face flushed red. Young lady, we're not stealing anything. We're developing treatments that will help millions of people. But you didn't make it, Lily said factually. Great-grandma did. Daddy told me the story. The simplicity of her logic cut through the legal complexity like a blade. Even Whitfield seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Avery seized the moment. Mr. Whitfield, how do you justify taking a formula developed by a family healer and claiming it as Meditech's property? How do you sleep at night knowing you're profiting from stolen heritage medicine? This conversation is over, Whitfield snapped. He handed Caleb a legal document, cease and desist order. Any further public statements about Meditech or this matter will result in immediate legal action. As the lawyers retreated to their black sedan, Caleb felt Lily's small hand slip into his. Are we in trouble, Daddy?
He looked down at her upturned face, then at Avery, who was already typing notes into her phone with journalistic fury. No, baby girl. We're just getting started. That evening, Caleb's phone rang with a call that would change everything again. The caller ID showed a number from Genesis Labs, but it wasn't Vivian's voice that greeted him. Mr. Morgan? This is Dr. Sarah Chen, Vivian's research partner. I'm calling because Vivian has been suspended pending an investigation into corporate espionage charges. Caleb's blood turned to ice. What? They're claiming she leaked confidential research data to outside parties. Mr. Morgan, they're destroying her career because she tried to help you. The weight of guilt crashed down on him like an avalanche. Vivian had risked everything to stand up for what was right, and now she was paying the price for his fight. Where is she now? At home. She's not taking this well. They've frozen her research accounts, confiscated her lab access, and threatened to pursue criminal charges if she continues to support your claims. Caleb closed his eyes, feeling the walls of his world closing in. Every ally who stood with him became a target. Every person who tried to help ended up destroyed by Meditech's corporate machinery. But as he looked at Lily, coloring quietly at the kitchen table while news trucks gathered outside their apartment building, he realized something fundamental had shifted inside him. He was no longer just fighting for his daughter's life or his grandmother's legacy. He was fighting for the principle that some things, love, heritage, hope, couldn't be bought, sold, or stolen by men in expensive suits. Dr. Chen, he said, his voice steady with newfound resolve. Tell Vivian that this isn't over. Tell her that some fights are worth everything you have to lose. Outside, camera crews were setting up for the evening news broadcast that would carry his story to millions of living rooms across America. Tomorrow, he would sit in a television studio and tell the world about Delilah's wisdom and Preston Carrington's theft. The battle for his daughter's future was about to become a war for the soul of American medicine.
And Caleb Morgan, former high school biology teacher and reluctant warrior, was ready to fight. The federal courthouse in Atlanta rose from the morning mist like a temple of justice, its marble columns gleaming white against the gray October sky. But as Caleb walked up those imposing steps with Lily's small hand clasped tightly in his own, the building felt more like a coliseum, where gladiators fought to the death for the entertainment of an indifferent crowd. Media crews lined the courthouse steps like hungry wolves, their cameras tracking every movement as the David who had dared to challenge Goliath made his way toward judgment. Behind them came the army of supporters who had rallied to #Justice for Lily, mothers holding signs with pictures of their own sick children, elderly people who remembered when healers like Delilah were the backbone of rural medicine, young activists who understood that some battles transcended profit margins. "Daddy, why are there so many people?" Lily whispered, her voice barely audible above the shouting reporters and chanting crowds. "Because sometimes, baby girl, one person's fight becomes everybody's fight. Because people still believe that doing what's right matters more than doing what's profitable." Inside the courtroom, the battle lines were drawn with corporate precision. On one side sat Preston Carrington's legal army, 12 lawyers in identical dark suits, their table covered with bankers' boxes full of documentation and precedent cases. Their confidence radiated from them like heat from a furnace, the easy assurance of people who had never lost a fight that mattered. On the other side sat Caleb's modest team, himself, Avery Wells, and a single public interest lawyer named David Kim who had volunteered to take the case pro bono after reading about it in the newspaper. Their table looked pathetically sparse in comparison, holding only a few manila folders and Delilah's original recipe book. But it was the gallery behind them that told the real story. Every seat was filled with people who had been moved by Lily's plight, by the injustice of seeing ancient wisdom stolen by corporate greed. In the front row sat Vivian Reyes, her career in ruins but her moral courage intact, and Mayor Janet Clay, who had driven through the night to be here for the family she'd watched grow up. Judge Margaret Harrison entered with the measured dignity of someone who had spent 30 years weighing the scales of justice. She was a small woman in her 60s, her silver hair pulled back severely, her dark eyes sharp with intelligence and experience. "This case," she began, her voice carrying easily through the packed courtroom, "raises fundamental questions about intellectual property, heritage knowledge, and the relationship between traditional healing and modern medicine. The court will hear arguments regarding the validity of patent application 17,892,456 and the competing claims of ownership."
Preston's lead attorney, a shark named Harrison Blackstone, rose with theatrical precision. His opening statement was a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak, painting Meditechs as innocent innovators who had independently discovered a breakthrough treatment through legitimate research. "Your Honor," Blackstone intoned, his voice smooth as aged whiskey, "my client has invested millions of dollars and countless hours developing this revolutionary treatment. Mr. Morgan's claims of prior ownership are based on nothing more than an elderly woman's folk remedies and wishful thinking. Patent law protects genuine innovation, not family recipes." He gestured dismissively toward Caleb's table. "The plaintiff would have this court believe that a high school biology teacher and his deceased grandmother somehow developed pharmaceutical-grade compounds in a kitchen. The very suggestion is preposterous." David Kim's response was quieter, but no less powerful. He spoke about heritage knowledge, about the centuries of wisdom that pharmaceutical companies had been appropriating without credit or compensation. He talked about Delilah Morgan's documented work as a healer, about the detailed chemical notations that proved her understanding went far beyond simple folk medicine. But it was when he called Lily to the stand that the courtroom fell silent. She walked to the witness chair on unsteady legs, her pale face determined despite the weakness that had been growing worse each day. The court reporter lowered her microphone, and Judge Harrison's stern expression softened as she looked at the brave little girl who had become the symbol of this fight. "Lily," David Kim said gently, "can you tell the court about your great-grandmother?" "Great-grandma Delilah was magic," Lily said, her voice clear and strong despite her frailty. "She knew which plants could help people feel better, and she wrote it all down so it wouldn't be forgotten." "And why is it important that people remember her medicine?"
Lily looked directly at Preston Carrington, her amber eyes holding more wisdom than her 6 years should have contained. Because she made it for love, not for money. She wanted to help people like me who are sick and scared. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Blackstone seemed momentarily speechless in the face of such simple, devastating truth. But Preston's team wasn't finished. They brought in expert witnesses who questioned the validity of traditional knowledge, who argued that without rigorous clinical trials and peer review, Delilah's work was just educated guesswork. They presented documentation showing Meditech's independent research timeline, carefully crafted to suggest their discovery predated any contact with Caleb. Then Vivian took the stand. She had lost weight since her suspension, her face gaunt with stress and sleepless nights, but her voice was steady as she testified about the molecular complexity of Delilah's formula, about the impossibility of developing such sophisticated compound interactions without extensive pharmaceutical knowledge. "This wasn't folk medicine," she said, looking directly at the jury. "This was advanced biochemistry disguised as traditional healing. The level of understanding required to create these specific molecular interactions would challenge researchers at any major pharmaceutical company." Blackstone's cross-examination was brutal. He attacked her credibility, her motives, her romantic relationship with Caleb that had developed during their work together. He painted her as a bitter ex-employee seeking revenge against her former company. "Dr. Reyes, isn't it true that you provided confidential Meditech's research to outside parties without authorization?" "I provided information about stolen intellectual property to a journalist investigating corporate theft. You violated your employment contract and your professional ethics for personal reasons. I violated corporate loyalty for moral reasons. There's a difference." The testimony continued for 3 days, each side presenting evidence and arguments that would determine not just the fate of one patent, but the broader question of whether traditional knowledge could be protected from corporate appropriation. On the final day, Avery Wells revealed her masterpiece, a paper trail showing that Meditech had hired private investigators to research Delilah's background immediately after Preston's visit to Genesis Labs. Phone records proved that Preston had called his legal team within hours of seeing the preliminary test results. "Your Honor," David Kim said in his closing argument, "this case isn't about patents or profits. It's about justice. It's about protecting the heritage knowledge of healers like Delilah Morgan from the predatory practices of corporations that see human suffering as nothing more than a market opportunity."
Decided to turn that desperation into profit. The question before you today is simple. Will we allow that theft to stand? Blackstone's closing was equally passionate, arguing that patent protection required rigorous standards that couldn't be undermined by emotional appeals. "Sympathy cannot trump science," he declared. "Good intentions cannot replace good documentation." As the jury filed out to deliberate, Caleb sat in the hallway holding Lily, who had grown increasingly weak during the trial proceedings. Her breathing was shallow, her skin pale as winter morning, and he could see the fear growing in her eyes despite her brave facade. "Daddy, what happens if we lose?" she whispered. Caleb looked through the courthouse windows at the crowd still maintaining their vigil outside, at the reporters who had made their story a national cause, at all the people who had decided that some fights were worth joining, even when the odds were impossible. "We don't lose, baby girl," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We've already won something more important than any patent. We've shown the world that love is stronger than greed, that truth is more powerful than money." But even as he spoke the words, he couldn't shake the fear that it wouldn't be enough. That sometimes, in a world ruled by corporate power and legal technicalities, love and truth weren't enough to protect the things that mattered most. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and fading hope. The machines monitoring Lily's vital signs beeping with mechanical indifference to the drama unfolding beyond these sterile walls.
Caleb sat beside her bed, his hand gently stroking her fevered forehead. As she drifted in and out of consciousness, her small body finally succumbing to the autoimmune storm that had been building for months. 3 days had passed since the jury began deliberations. 3 days of legal limbo while his daughter's condition deteriorated with frightening speed. The irony was unbearable. They were fighting for control of a formula that could save her life, while she slipped away before his eyes. "The inflammation markers are off the charts," Dr. Martinez said quietly, studying Lily's latest blood work with the grave expression of a physician who had run out of medical miracles. "Her immune system is attacking her muscle tissue faster than we can suppress it. The conventional treatments, they're not working anymore." Caleb nodded, unable to trust his voice. Outside the hospital window, he could see news vans still camped in the parking lot, their satellite dishes reaching toward a gray sky that seemed to mirror his despair. The whole world was watching their fight, but none of that attention could heal his dying daughter. His phone buzzed with a text message. "Vivian, are you at the hospital? I'm coming up." She arrived 20 minutes later, her face drawn with exhaustion and purpose, carrying a small cooler that she clutched like a lifeline. Behind her came Dr. Sarah Chen, Vivian's former research partner, her expression a mixture of excitement and terror. "Caleb," Vivian said, her voice tight with controlled emotion, "we need to talk, now." They moved to the small family conference room down the hall, leaving Lily sleeping under the watchful eyes of her nurses. Vivian set the cooler on the table with trembling hands. "What's in there?" Caleb asked, though some part of him already knew. "Hope," Dr. Chen said simply. "Maybe the only hope we have left." Vivian opened the cooler, revealing several vials of pale green liquid that seemed to glow with their own inner light. "I've been working in a private lab since my suspension. Sarah's been helping me, using her own research access to continue testing the complete formula, including the moonwort you found." "That's the medicine?" Caleb's heart began to race. "From Grandma Delilah's recipe?" "It's more than that," Sarah said, her excitement barely contained. "The moonwort compound acts as a molecular key that unlocks the immune-modulating potential of the other herbs. Without it, you have individual medications. With it, you have a symphony of healing that works on multiple pathways simultaneously." Vivian leaned forward, her dark eyes bright with scientific fervor and personal desperation. "Caleb, we've tested this on cell cultures with Lily's specific autoimmune markers. The results are extraordinary. The compound doesn't just suppress her overactive immune response, it actually teaches her immune system to recognize the difference between healthy tissue and genuine threats." The room seemed to spin around him. "You're saying it could cure her?" "I'm saying it could give her a real chance," Vivian said carefully, "but there are risks. This hasn't gone through clinical trials. We don't have FDA approval. Legally, administering this would be considered experimental treatment without proper authorization." Dr. Martinez, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped into the room with the weary expression of a physician who had watched too many children die from diseases that might have been preventable. "The ethics committee would never approve unauthorized experimental treatment," he said quietly. "My medical license, my career, the hospital's reputation, we'd all be at risk." Caleb looked at the vials of green liquid, then back toward the room where his daughter lay dying, despite every conventional treatment modern medicine could offer. The choice crystallized with painful clarity. What would happen if someone, hypothetically, administered this treatment without official authorization? Professionally, career suicide, Dr. Martinez said. Legally, potential criminal charges for practicing medicine without proper protocols. And medically? The doctor was quiet for a long moment. "Based on what Dr. Reyes has shown me, medically, it might be the only thing that could save your daughter's life." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Through the window, Caleb could see the courthouse where a jury was still debating whether his grandmother's wisdom belonged to his family or to Preston Carrington's corporate empire. But here, In this sterile room surrounded by people who had risked their careers to help him, the legal battle seemed suddenly irrelevant. How would it work? He asked. Intravenous infusion over 6 hours. We'd need to monitor her constantly, watch for any adverse reactions. The theoretical framework suggests we should see improvement within 12 to 18 hours if it's going to work. And if it doesn't work? Vivian's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for days. Then we'll have tried everything. Then we'll know we didn't give up. Dr. Martinez stepped closer to the table, his professional caution warring with his fundamental commitment to healing. There's one more thing you need to understand. If we do this, and word gets out before the legal case is resolved, Preston Carrington's lawyers will use it to argue that you've been conducting unauthorized human trials. It could destroy your patent claim completely. Caleb thought about that for exactly 3 seconds. I don't care about the patent, he said, his voice steady with absolute certainty. I care about my daughter. That evening, as storm clouds gathered outside the hospital windows, they began the infusion. Lily lay connected to machines that would monitor every heartbeat, every breath, every cellular response to her great-grandmother's miracle medicine. Will it taste funny? She asked weakly, watching the pale green liquid flow through the IV line into her small arm. Probably, Caleb said, smoothing her hair with infinite gentleness. Great-grandma's medicines usually tasted like grass and flowers and secret magic. Secret magic, Lily repeated with a faint smile. I like that. As the hours passed, Caleb maintained his vigil beside her bed, watching for any sign of change. Vivian monitored the medical equipment with scientific precision, while Dr. Martinez checked her vital signs every 30 minutes, his professional skepticism gradually giving way to cautious optimism. At 3 a.m., 18 hours after the infusion began, Lily's fever broke. At 6 a.m., her inflammation markers began dropping for the first time in months. At 9 a.m., she opened her eyes and asked for pancakes. "Daddy," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks, "I feel different. I feel not sick." Caleb's phone rang as he was crying tears of joy and relief. The caller ID showed the courthouse number. "Mr. Morgan, this is Judge Harrison's clerk. The jury has reached a verdict. The court will reconvene at 2 p.m. today." Caleb looked at his daughter, who was sitting up in bed for the first time in days, color returning to her cheeks like spring returning to winter earth. He looked at Vivian, whose scientific breakthrough had given them back their miracle. He looked at Dr. Martinez, who had risked everything to help a desperate father save his child. The legal battle had consumed his life for months, had made him a reluctant symbol of resistance against corporate greed. But now, holding his healing daughter in his arms, he realized something fundamental had shifted. Whatever the jury decided, whatever Preston Carrington's lawyers argued, whatever the headlines would say tomorrow, they had already won the only victory that truly mattered. Lily was going to live. And Delilah's legacy, not as corporate property, but as a grandmother's love transformed into healing, would live with her. The courthouse erupted in chaos as Judge Harrison read the verdict that would echo through the halls of corporate power for decades to come. "We find in favor of the plaintiff, Caleb Morgan, and order the immediate reversal of patent application 17892456. The court further orders Meditex Pharma Corporation to pay punitive damages in the amount of $50 million for corporate theft and fraudulent patent claims. The roar from the gallery was deafening. Supporters who had maintained vigil throughout the trial leaped to their feet, tears streaming down their faces as they celebrated a victory that seemed impossible just weeks ago. Reporters rushed toward their cameras, ready to broadcast the moment when David finally slew Goliath. But Caleb barely heard the celebration. His attention was focused entirely on Lily, who sat beside him in her wheelchair, not because she was dying anymore, but because the miracle cure flowing through her veins had left her weak but healing. Her amber eyes sparkled with the same joy that had illuminated the courtroom, but underneath lay the wisdom of a child who had learned that some victories cost more than anyone should have to pay. Preston Carrington's face had gone white as marble, his corporate composure finally cracking to reveal the rage and desperation beneath. His empire, built on a systematic theft of other people's innovations, was crumbling in real time as stock prices plummeted and regulatory agencies opened investigations into his company's business practices. "This isn't over," he snarled as he pushed past Caleb toward the exit, his army of lawyers trailing behind like the remnants of a defeated legion. "You have no idea what you've unleashed. No idea what it takes to bring a drug to market, to navigate FDA approval, to manufacture at scale. You'll be buried in regulatory red tape for decades." Caleb watched him go with a mixture of satisfaction and pity. Preston had never understood that this battle was never really about money or patents or corporate control. It had always been about something much more fundamental: the right of ordinary people to protect the things they loved from those who would exploit them. "Daddy?" Lily whispered, tugging on his sleeve. "Does this mean great-grandma's medicine can help other kids like me?" Before Caleb could answer, they were surrounded by reporters, cameras, and microphones. The questions came like machine gun fire. "Mr. Morgan, how does it feel to defeat Big Pharma? Will you be licensing the patent to other companies? What's next for the miracle formula?" But it was Avery Wells who asked the question that mattered most. "What are you going to do with your victory?" Caleb lifted Lily into his arms, feeling the solid weight of her healing body, the steady rhythm of her strengthening heartbeat. Around them, the courthouse celebration continued, people chanting his name like he was some kind of hero. But heroes, he was beginning to understand, were just ordinary people who faced impossible choices and somehow found the courage to do what was right. "I'm going to make a choice my grandmother would be proud of," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the chaos. 6 weeks later, Caleb stood in the renovated shell of Delilah's old apothecary shop, watching construction workers install state-of-the-art laboratory equipment alongside traditional herb drying racks and grinding stations. The juxtaposition should have looked ridiculous: cutting-edge pharmaceutical technology sharing space with ancient healing wisdom, but somehow it felt perfect. Vivian emerged from what would become their main research lab, her hair tied back in a practical ponytail, safety glasses perched on her nose, her face bright with the excitement of someone who had finally found work that fed her soul as well as her intellect. "The first batch of standardized extract is ready for the pilot clinical trial," she announced, holding up a vial of the pale green liquid that had become their symbol of hope. "The FDA fast-tracked our application after the publicity from the trial. We could have preliminary approval for pediatric autoimmune treatment within 18 months. "And the cost?" Caleb asked, though he already knew the answer would determine everything that followed. "That's the beautiful part. Without corporate profit margins and executive compensation packages, we can manufacture this for about $12 per treatment cycle. Compare that to the $100,000 Meditex was planning to charge." Lily ran through the shop with the boundless energy of a 6-year-old who had forgotten what it felt like to be sick. Her latest blood work showed immune markers in the normal range for the first time in her life. She was, according to every test Dr. Martinez could devise, completely healthy. But it wasn't just Lily who had been healed. In the weeks following the trial, desperate families from across the country had reached out, sharing stories of children suffering from the same autoimmune conditions that had nearly claimed his daughter's life. The Morgan Foundation, established with the punitive damages from Meditex, was funding research into adapting Delilah's formula for different conditions, different needs. "Mr. Morgan?" A young woman entered the shop, carrying a folder thick with legal documents. "I'm Jessica Chen from Phoenix Bio Corporation. We're prepared to offer you $200 million for exclusive licensing rights to your formula. With our global distribution network, we could have this treatment available worldwide within 5 years." It was the third such offer he had received that week. Every pharmaceutical company in the world wanted to partner with the man who had defeated Preston Carrington, who held the patents to what industry analysts were calling the most significant pharmaceutical breakthrough of the decade.
Immune system stability. Dr. Martinez had used words like miraculous and unprecedented, but Caleb preferred Lily's simpler description. Great-grandma's love made me better. "Daddy, look!" She held up a perfect moonwort bloom, its silver-green petals catching the morning light. "It's like a tiny moon fell into our garden." "Just like great-grandma always said," Caleb replied, kneeling beside her in the rich earth that had nurtured healing for generations. "The earth provides everything we need. We just have to listen." The sound of approaching vehicles drew his attention to the winding road that led to their sanctuary. A steady stream of cars was arriving for the dedication ceremony. Reporters, healthcare advocates, families whose children had been healed by the formula, and ordinary people who had been inspired by their story to believe that change was possible. But it was the familiar blue sedan that made Caleb's heart quicken with anticipation. Vivian emerged from the car with the graceful confidence of a woman who had found her calling. Her once severe lab coat had been replaced by a flowing dress the color of spring leaves, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her eyes bright with the joy of someone who woke each morning excited about the work ahead. Behind her came Dr. Sarah Chen and the research team that had helped transform Delilah's wisdom into standardized treatments now being used in community clinics across 12 states. The pilot program had exceeded every projection with success rates that made pharmaceutical executives weep with envy and healthcare economists scramble to revise their models. "How are our special guests?" Vivian asked, accepting Caleb's embrace with the easy intimacy of partners who had weathered impossible storms together. "Nervous and excited," Caleb admitted. "Mayor Clay has been rehearsing her speech since sunrise, and the delegation from the World Health Organization seems impressed by what we've built here." Indeed, the transformed apothecary was a marvel that bridged centuries of healing tradition. The main floor still featured Delilah's original herb drying racks and preparation stations, now complemented by state-of-the-art extraction equipment and quality control laboratories. Upstairs, researchers worked alongside traditional healers, documenting indigenous remedies from around the world while respecting the cultural heritage from which they sprang. The basement had become a manufacturing facility capable of producing standardized treatments at costs so low they made corporate pharmaceuticals seem like highway robbery. The Delilah formula, as it had become known worldwide, was now available to any child who needed it for the price of a school lunch. "The delegation from Ghana is particularly interested in our community ownership model," Vivian continued, her scientific excitement barely contained. "They want to adapt our approach for traditional medicines that could treat diseases affecting millions of children in sub-Saharan Africa." As the morning progressed, the garden filled with people whose lives had been touched by their journey. Avery Wells, whose investigative reporting had helped expose the corruption of the pharmaceutical industry and won her a Pulitzer Prize, arrived with a television crew documenting the global impact of community-owned medicine. Dr. Martinez came with a group of pediatric specialists who had witnessed the transformation not just of Lily, but of dozens of children whose conditions had been deemed hopeless by conventional medicine. Their professional skepticism had given way to wonder as they watched ancient wisdom prove more effective than modern pharmaceuticals that cost 1,000 times more. Even some of Preston Carrington's former employees had made the pilgrimage to Willow Creek, scientists and researchers who had grown disgusted with the corporate model that prioritized profit over patients. They came seeking redemption, hoping to find work that honored their oath to heal rather than exploit. As the dedication ceremony began, Mayor Jeanette Clay stood before the assembled crowd with tears in her eyes and pride in her voice.
1 year ago, she said, her words carrying across the garden like a prayer, a desperate father discovered that his grandmother's love could heal more than just one sick child. Today, we celebrate not just the opening of a research institute, but the birth of a new way of thinking about medicine, about community, about the responsibility we have to care for one another. She gestured toward the restored apothecary, where Delilah's photograph now held a place of honor beside portraits of other healers whose wisdom had been nearly lost to history. Delilah Morgan believed that healing was a sacred trust, not a commercial transaction. Her grandson has proven that we can honor that trust while still embracing the best of modern science. When it came time for Caleb to speak, he found himself overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they had accomplished. A year ago, he was a broken, single father facing the loss of everything he held dear. Today, he stood as the founder of an organization that was revolutionizing global healthcare. But the words that came to him were simple, drawn from the wisdom Delilah had whispered in his ear during countless childhood visits.
My grandmother used to tell me that medicine without love is just chemistry, but love without medicine is just wishful thinking. Today, we celebrate the marriage of both, science guided by compassion, research driven by purpose, healing born of love, and shared without greed. He looked out at the faces gathered in the garden, researchers and healers, parents and children, advocates and dreamers who had dared to believe that the world could be different. But this is just the beginning, he continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. Every child who receives treatment at cost instead of being denied care due to poverty, every traditional healer whose knowledge is documented and respected rather than dismissed as superstition, every community that takes ownership of its healthcare future, they are all part of Delilah's legacy now. As the crowd applauded, Lily tugged on his shirt with the persistent urgency of childhood. "Daddy, you forgot the most important part." He knelt down to her level, seeing his own hope reflected in her amber eyes. "What's that, baby girl?" She smiled with the wisdom of someone who had learned that love was the most powerful medicine of all. "You forgot to tell them about the new beginning." And then, in front of everyone who had helped them transform grief into healing, Caleb took Vivian's hand in his own and pulled out the simple ring Lily had helped him choose. Not a diamond that sparkled with corporate wealth, but a moonstone that glowed with the same gentle light as the herbs in Delilah's garden. "Vivian Reyes," he said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes, "will you help me build a future where healing and love grow together, where science serves humanity instead of profit, where children like Lily never have to choose between medicine and hope?" Her answer was a kiss that sealed not just their engagement, but their commitment to the revolution they had started together. As the sun set over Willow Creek, painting the sky in shades of hope and promise, 3 generations of healing wisdom came full circle. Delilah's spirit lived on in every child who would receive her medicine, every healer who honored her example, every person who chose love over greed. And in the secret garden, where moonwort bloomed under the Georgia stars, the future began. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.